Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I saw this satirical piece by Jim Rice of the Daily Wire the other day, and it got me thinking about some things. What if Kamala Harris had won the election last November? We would be reading and listening to entirely different kinds of news reports, right? I mean, it might sound something more like this. Just over 100 days ago, President Kamala Harris placed her hand on a signed copy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's memoir and took the oath of office. It's been a tremendous few months since America's first Black Indian female president moved her power suits and boxes of unsold "I'm Speaking" t-shirts into the Oval Office. The Daily Wire has done its best to keep up with the fire hose of news coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And while we appreciate you joining us on this journey, we understand if you've had a hard time keeping up. So, to mark this milestone of the Harris administration, let's take stock of where we are. The Harris-Walz administration has some pretty major problems, both at home and abroad. But you wouldn't know based on the smiling faces at the White House Easter egg roll, which this year was duly billed as the Transgender Day of Visibility Parade. First Gentleman Doug Emhoff was all smiles, dancing to Katy Perry. In lieu of the traditional Easter bunny, children posed with Emhoff's daughter, Ella, who donned bunny ears and dyed her armpit hair festive pastels for the occasion. Second Lady Gwen Walz was set to hold court at the Planned Parenthood Storybook Corner, but her delivery of Pat the Bunny was reportedly so disconcerting that most children fled in tears. Not present at the event was Harris's predecessor, Joe Biden, who, you'll remember, was granted a full and unconditional pardon from Harris just hours after being sworn in. Harris also pardoned Hunter Biden, Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and the members of the House Judiciary January 6th Committee. All the pardons date back to 2014, an unprecedented sweep that had even some of the Harris's allies shocked. Legal experts say the only thing more shocking would have been for Biden to issue the pardons himself on his last day in office. From there, it was off to the races. A group of red state attorney generals challenged Biden's 11th hour executive order declaring the Equal Rights Amendment the law of the land. The case made its way to the Supreme Court, where Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined the liberals in a surprise 5-4 ruling, which held that public assertions of gender binaries were a violation of federal law. Despite an almost complete lack of judicial challenges to her executive orders, President Harris's agenda has not moved the needle on most of the issues facing Americans today. Nowhere is this clearer than the economy, where the Harris administration's efforts to pull the country out of Biden's economic mess has been hampered by her refusal to admit her predecessor's mistakes or in any way deviate from his playbook. Rather than cut taxes or play hardball with Americans' trading partners, Harris has taken to giving pep talks. The latest from an address making her 100th day in office shows that she's not making much use of the White House speech writing staff. Quote, Who saw that video from a couple of weeks ago? The one of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo during the earthquake. Harris asked the crowd at Emerge, a gala dedicated to honoring Democratic women. Quote, here those elephants, there those elephants were, and as soon as they felt the earth shaking beneath their feet, they got in a circle and stood next to each other to protect the most vulnerable. Think about it. What a powerful metaphor, unquote. Well, an unedited video of the speech posted by the Daily Wire was removed from Facebook, which has doubled down on censorship since Harris won election. The newly formed Hate Speech Commission, co-chaired by Al Sharpton and Robin DiAngelo, said criticizing Harris's speech was bigoted, as they put it. Harris's commitment to the most vulnerable doesn't seem to extend to the countless Americans murdered by illegal aliens, as illegal border crossings continue to beat previous records. Some 480,000 illegals have entered the country over the past 100 days. Like Biden did for Harris when she was vice president, Harris anointed Vice President Walz her border czar. Walz has done little to strengthen the border or keep criminal aliens from entering our country. Instead, the vice president spends most of his time whining and dining transgender athletes at the White House ceremonies. Things don't look much better abroad. Hamas has not released a single hostage, and the bloody stalemate in Gaza seems destined to drag on as Harris and Secretary of State Pete Buttigieg issue nothing stronger than warnings for both sides to abide by international law. Iran-backed Houthi terrorists continue to their assault on American and European ships, and Tehran, emboldened by its progress on developing a nuclear weapon, is becoming more and more brazen about funding terrorism. And Russia's attack on Ukraine continue apace, with Kyiv showing no signs that the latest $10 billion in American aid is doing much to win the war. Ukrainian President Zelensky, whose rude performance in February Oval Office meeting was met with further groveling from Harris and Walz, seems undeterred in his demands. Russian President Putin's propaganda machine has ceaselessly mocked Harris and Walz for their weakness on the world stage. And it's clear what will come from, it's unclear what will come from the next 100 days. Human and Health Services Secretary Vivek Murthy seems hellbent on following his tobacco ban by making red meat illegal. And Attorney General Cory Booker will almost certainly hold another press conference where he compares library fines to segregation. For our sake, let's hope Secretary of State Buttigieg doesn't have another gaffe like he had in Riyadh. Press Secretary Harry Sisson did not respond to a request for comment. And to buoy their spirits, Republicans have jumped the gun on the 2028 speculation. Senator J.D. Vance resettling in as the upper chamber has, demurred whenever approached about a potential campaign. And while former President Donald Trump has stoked 2028 speculation on Truth Social, it remains to be seen whether or not he'll mount a third campaign. As of this writing, Trump was last seen returning to Mar-a-Lago after a round of golf. Video shows the former president shaking hands and posing for pictures with guests, occasionally turning to the crowd and ask, "Miss me yet?" Well, as funny as this may be, it would really have been reality. But what kept this from happening? Well, Robert Manning shared some insights on Substack when he said that politics is a game of numbers. And in a democracy, the most effective way to win is to align yourself with the majority. That's where 80-20 issues come in. those political fights where 80% of Americans agree on one side while only 20% back the other. The party that stakes out the 80%, stakes out the 80% side, while and positions secure a commanding political advantage, while the party clinging to the unpopular 20% is left flailing. For the past decade, Republicans have increasingly found themselves on the winning side of 80-20 issues, while Democrats, blinded by ideology, purity, and activist pressure, have dug in on losing ground. This dynamic is shaping electoral outcomes, pushing independents toward the GOP, and forcing Democrats into an ever smaller corner of American political life. So, what are 80-20 issues? Well, an 80-20 issue is one where a vast majority of the public, cutting across racial, class, and political lines, agrees with one stance, while only a fringe majority takes the opposing view. In today's political landscape, Republicans dominate these issues, while Democrats stubbornly cling to the losing side. Here are some of the most prominent examples, like, for instance, border security and illegal immigration. 80% position Republican. The U.S. should secure the border, enforce immigration laws, and stop the flood of illegal crossings. 20% the Democrat. Open borders, mass amnesty, and sanctuary cities are good policy. Most Americans, regardless of party, want a secure border and controlled immigration. Yet Democrats continue to advocate for lax enforcement, oppose border security measures, and even call for dismantling ICE. The results? Record number of illegal crossings, crime spikes, and a political backlash benefiting Republicans. Even blue states like New York and Illinois are now pushing back against the migrant crisis their own party encouraged. But how about crime and law enforcement? Well, 80% position is Republican. Law enforcement should be funded and supported. Criminals should be held accountable. The 20% position that the Democrats hold are defund the police, no cash bail, and a leniency for violent offenders. Americans overwhelmingly want safe communities, and they see crime rising in cities where progressive policies dominate. The 2020 defund the police movement was an electoral disaster for Democrats. Yet many in the party still refuse to abandon soft on crime policies. Meanwhile, Republican candidates run and win on restoring law and order. But how about parental rights and education? 80% position, Republicans. Parents should have a say in their children's education and be able to protect them from radical gender ideology and racial indoctrination. And the 20% position held by the Democrats are schools should push gender transition, CRT, and inappropriate content on children without parental consent. Consent. There we go. Easily said for me. Well, the backlash against progressive education policies has flipped school boards, fueled GOP victories in Virginia, and sent suburban parents running from the Democratic Party. Parents do not want schools teaching radical ideologies to their children, but Democrats keep championing these unpopular policies. Speaking of unpopular policies that they champion, how about the biological reality of women's sports? 80% position, Republican. Women's sports should be for biological women. 20% position held by Democrats. Biological men should be allowed to compete in women's sports. You see, common sense is on the Republican side. Polls show an overwhelmingly majority of Americans, including a majority of Democrats, believe it or not, oppose allowing biological men to compete in women's sports. Yet, the Democratic Party refuses to budge, alienating voters across the board. And how about energy and the economy? 80% position, Republican. The U.S. should produce its own energy and lower costs for Americans. 20% position for Democrats: shut down oil and gas, raise prices, and make Americans dependent on China for green energy tech. See, voters feel the pain of high gas prices and skyrocketing utility bills. They know that America has the resources to be energy independent. We've been there before. Yet Democrats continue to push anti-fossil fuel policies that make life more expensive and hand control over to foreign adversaries. There's also the free speech versus censorship thing. 80% position, Republican. People should be free to speak their minds without fear of censorship or cancellation. But the 20% side held by Democrats is the government, big tech, and activists should police speech to silence misinformation and hate speech. Americans cherish the First Amendment, but the left's obsession with censorship, whether through government pressure on social media or just outright cancel culture, has turned free speech into a winning issue for Republicans. The Democratic Party used to be, they used to win elections by focusing on bread and butter issues like jobs and wages and healthcare and things like that. But over the past decade, the party has been hijacked by activists and corporate media and academia pushing policies that only appeal to elite progressives. Instead of adapting to public opinion, Democrats doubled down on deeply unpopular positions, alienating work-class voters and suburban parents and even traditional liberals, for that matter. Meanwhile, Republicans have coalesced around the 80% issues, making them the obvious choice for common sense voters. So, what's the electoral consequences? Well, in 2022, Republican candidates who ran on crime, immigration, and inflation outperformed expectations. In 2024 and beyond, if Democrats stay on the 20% side, they risk further losing in key swing states. Winning in politics isn't about ideological purity. It's about being on the side of the issues that matter to most Americans. Republicans have figured this out for the most part, positioning themselves as the party of common sense and law and order and parental rights and those type of things. Meanwhile, Democrats are trapped in a losing cycle, catering to their activist base while hemorrhaging support among mainstream voters. If Democrats want to stop losing elections, they need to stop fighting for the 20% and start listening to the overwhelming majority of Americans. Until then, the GOP will keep winning the 80-20 battles and eventually the war. But I say that the Democratic Party has even more problems than just the 80-20 issues, though. That's not the only thing they're battling. For instance, this article by Adam Milstein, he writes for the Jerusalem Post. He says that this statement, the American empire must fall. That's in quotes. This American empire must fall. This statement did not come from Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini, from Vladimir Putin of Russia, or from China's Xi Jinping. It came from a Muslim American resident of Dearborn, Michigan, who added, quote, "People are willing to fight and put their lives on the line for bringing these Western empires down," unquote. It's a chilling reminder that calls for the destruction of America and Western civilization, and are not limited to distant regimes. These ideas are now echoed within our own communities, on college campuses, on online platforms, and throughout nonprofit organizations. Following the violent protests and encampments that claimed to target Israel, many Americans began to understand the deeper truth. Radical Islam is no longer just an existential danger. It has embedded itself within our institutions and aligned itself with elements of the far left in a calculated attempt to weaken and undermine America from within. This partnership, often referred to as the red-green axis, is not a loose affiliation. It is a coordinated movement. Radical Islamists, cloaked in the legitimacy granted by progressive activists, are advancing a deliberate campaign to undermine American values. They are not merely promoting criticism or protest, but are engaged in an ideological form of jihad designed to destabilize our legal, educational, cultural, and political systems. History tells us how this story will end. This is not the first time such an alliance has taken place. In 1979, leftists in Iran joined forces with Islamic fundamentalists to overthrow the Shah. The left mistakenly believed it is standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity with radical Muslims for liberation and democracy and justice. But once the revolution succeeded, the Islamists turned on their former allies, imprisoning and executing them to establish a religious dictatorship. That same regime continues to oppress most of its citizens to this day. The same pattern is now emerging in the United States. We are witnessing a similar pattern unfold in the United States. Progressive activists, often unaware of the Islamic true agenda, march under the slogans such as "From the river to the sea" and "Globalize the infidada." Well, these phrases originate from extremist playbooks, and the activists using them believe they are fighting for justice, but they are unknowingly promoting a vision of society that fundamentally opposes everything they claim to support. Islamist extremists do not believe in freedom or equality. They view progressive allies not as partners, but as useful idiots to be used and discarded once their objectives have been achieved. So there is a war on America's core. This campaign is not confined to rhetoric. It is organized, funded, and executed through real infrastructure. As recently documented by the Capital Research Center, since October of 2023, nearly 500 American nonprofits claiming to support Palestinian rights have adopted increasingly radical positions. Groups such as Within Our Lifetime, the Palestinian Youth Movement, and Code Pink have amplified violent rhetoric and promoted anti-American narratives. The report also shows an online surge of over 3,000% in calls for violence and a 186% increase in anti-American and anti-police rhetoric. The social media posts affiliated with these groups have reached tens of millions of viewers. These are not isolated incidents. They reflect a systemic effort to radicalize young Americans and erode public trust in law enforcement, in government, and civil society. These organizations are not charities. They are domestic ideological insurgents. They use the nonprofit system to radicalize young Americans, promote sedition, and justify terrorism in an attempt to destroy American freedom. This ideological insurgency has taken root within nonprofit organizations and academic institutions. According to a new report by the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, Qatar, the global financier of the Muslim Brotherhood, has funneled hundreds of millions or even billions into American K-12 schools by partnering with universities like Brown to distribute curriculum materials that distort history and encourage anti-Western thinking. These materials are already present in thousands of classrooms nationwide. Another report by Open the Books, reveals that foreign regimes, including China, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, have invested heavily in programs that shape American education. Billions of dollars from taxpayers and foreign donors are now used to fund ideological departments, activist groups, and so-called diversity programs at top public universities. These programs often support faculty who defend or celebrate acts of terrorism. At Columbia University, one professor described the October 7th Hamas massacre as a triumph for Palestinian resistance. That professor continues to receive government-backed funding. The institutions that once safeguarded truth and education are now being used as tools of indoctrination. This is not a debate over policy. It's a fight for the future of our country. We must stop viewing this as a foreign affairs issue. This is an American issue that affects every citizen, regardless of background or political affiliation. If we allow our civic institutions to be overtaken by extremist ideologies, if we excuse those who glorify jihad in the name of justice, then we will endanger the very freedoms that define us. So what's the path forward? Well, the United States must respond with strength and moral clarity. Organizations that promote violence must lose their nonprofit status. Educational institutions that accept foreign funds must face scrutiny and accountability. Public officials must call out and reject this alliance between the radical Islam and the far left. And progressive leaders must draw a clear line between social justice and extremist ideology. At the same time, we must offer a better path forward. We must renew our commitment to truth and liberty and individual rights. We must protect the integrity of our education system and restore trust in our institutions. We must raise a generation that understands both the privilege and the responsibility of living in a free society. This campaign to divide and destroy our nation thrives on confusion. It relies on fear, and it relies on chaos, and it relies on the silence of those who should know better. We must not remain silent. America has always faced adversity with courage and with conviction. And we have overcome external enemies and internal division before. And with resolve, unity, and a renewed sense of purpose, we will do so again. The future of our country is still in our hands. Let us rise to meet this challenge with clarity and strength and hope. You see, it's true. We can't be silent on these things. The violent left, and I call them that, they are the violent left, because if you are to look at any news organization, well, any credible news organization, you will see time after time after time again that it is the left that is violent, and with few exceptions to that rule. And they are the ones that are angry. They are the ones that just their ideology is taking them to emotional places they shouldn't be, and it's only being stoked by the leaders of the Democratic Party. It is only being stoked by liberal leaders that love when they're mad, because when people are mad, they're loyal. If they are emotional about it, if they're angry about what is happening, then they're loyal to that cause. So what's happening is they are being stirred up, and they're getting mad, and they're becoming violent, unfortunately, because there's a tipping point when people are so upset that they're willing to take it out in a violent way. That becomes a problem. And so that's what we see happening. The violent left has been emboldened by the radical Muslims, and it has to be addressed. And yet the Democratic Party has done nothing to promote this kind of thing. This is just another reason that they're losing in the arena of public debate. I can't imagine what it would have been like had the November election gone the other way. I would love to hear from you on it. I would love to see what your thoughts there are. And you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. We're on YouTube now. Please like and subscribe and tell somebody about it. We would appreciate that. And thank you for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.